everybody to today's webinar, and ask everybody to please stay muted during the presentation. You can raise your hand or put your questions in the chat and we'll be able to see and hear those. I think that Andrew's going to give a brief presentation and then take questions, and with that I will turn it over to Linnell to get us started.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking time out of a beautiful Wednesday to hear a little bit more about what's going on with redistricting here in Jacksonville. Our guest speaker today is a busy man. Most of us know him from his time as a reporter with the Times-Union, but he's quickly become quite notable for covering redistricting, not only in our state's capital up in Tallahassee, but right here in our backyard in Jacksonville. So because he has some important stuff to cover, I really just want to go ahead and turn the Zoom floor over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really grateful for the League of Women Voters of Jacksonville. We were able to partner in the past to help get some information out about redistricting the first time around, the time that the court found the city council had racially gerrymandered, and I think that was really helpful. I'm going to share a presentation. So let me put that up, and then I'll just kind of talk through some of the latest of what's been happening here in Jacksonville. Let me share screen. And feel free to go into the chat and ask any questions that you might have. So just to give the brief overview of where redistricting plays out, every 10 years, the US Census counts every person in the United States and releases that data at what's called the census block level. And local and state governments need to make sure that if they have districts for elections, that those districts are roughly equal in population. So every 10 years, they need to redraw the maps that they're using. So that's at the state legislature, your state house, your state senate, your congressional districts. And here locally, it's our city council and our school board districts that need to be redrawn. The census this last time found that Jacksonville and Duval County are growing more diverse. What we see is, for the first time ever, Duval County is no longer majority non-Hispanic white. Black residents make up about 32% of the county's population, and Hispanic and Asian residents make up about 18%. And then about 10% identify as other. The first time when the Jacksonville City Council started meeting, they started with their old 2011 plan that had passed. And they were committed to not making many changes to that plan. They said that they wanted to protect incumbents on the city council. They wanted to make as few changes as possible. And even though they claimed they didn't want to cross the St. Johns River, they continued to cross the St. Johns River with District 2 over by the Dames Point Bridge. And they made more significant changes on the south side, where District 11 was the most populous district, and so it had to shrink, and District 13 was the least populous, so it had to grow. But the real area of concern for the federal court and for voters has been what's happening over here. So these dots on this map are colored by race. So green is Black voters. And what you can see, especially over with District 9 with this appendage, how much it was surgical in picking up and slicing neighborhoods on the basis of race. So down here you have Murray Hill, where neighborhoods that have more Black residents were put into District 9, while neighborhoods with more white residents in Murray Hill were put into District 14. And the same is true over here, just west of Ortega, where neighborhoods with more Black residents were put into District 9, while white residents were put into District 14. And that plays out all across the map. Basically, every decision that this city council made and the previous city council made was based on increasing the Black percentages of 4 districts. And those districts are 7, 8, 9, and 10. They range from 61% Black to 70% Black. And just to give context for that, the congressional district that we used to have in Jacksonville that Al Lawson represents was 45% Black. And so going to 61 to 70% Black is far beyond what's necessary. The analysis that you're supposed to do under the Federal Voting Rights Act is, if it applies, you're supposed to draw districts that allow Black voters the ability to elect their preferred candidates. But you're not supposed to go beyond that. You're supposed to be, it's called narrow tailoring. You can use race as a factor, but only if it's narrowly tailored and only if it's for a compelling interest, like complying with the Voting Rights Act. In this case, the city council never claimed the Voting Rights Act applied to Jacksonville, and they never claimed that they were narrowly tailoring their use of race. Instead, it was just very upfront and obvious from the beginning. You had council members like Jacoby Pittman, who said she was not going to come down from 68% Black in her district. Very upfront, saying she was going to stay at that number. And you had Councilman Gaffney in District 7, as they needed to grow his district. He was going through every single census block they were adding and making sure he got the blocks that had the most Black residents, which is why you see here Imison and Ocean Way getting split up and sliced and diced so that the whiter neighborhoods fall into District 2. The result of that is not just that those 4 districts then are Black supermajority, but it's also that District 2, District 14, and District 12 become much whiter than they otherwise would. And on a city council of 19 council members, you really limit and reduce Black voting power and Black influence in city politics if Black voters are only able to elect in 4 out of 19 council members. And we also have 5 at-large seats in addition to the 14 districts in Jacksonville, which also can be diluting Black voting power. The other result of this that neighbors and residents kept speaking out about was how this hurts their ability to get city council members to respond to their issues. So I don't have it zoomed in on this map, but if you look at Grand Park, for example, over here, where Grand Park and Myrtle Avenue are divided up across multiple districts, or Sherwood Forest up here, that's divided among multiple districts, or again, we talked about Murray Hill. For neighbors in those seats, especially the ones where they're divided into 3 districts, they aren't even able to have city council members come to their neighborhood association meetings unless they publicly notice them, because they don't have 1 city council member, because they have 2 or 3 city council members. And that really makes it harder for them to get council members to listen and to hear their concerns. And so that's really hurt for a lot of these people, their ability to get a responsive government. I think it was actually really well displayed recently at the last city council meeting, where they brought up the redistricting proposal, the latest one that they'll be discussing. Someone was there from District 8 who was talking about infrastructure problems. The council member from District 8, Councilwoman Pittman, never once looked up from the paper she was looking at, never responded. And instead it was an at-large council member who stood up and said, will someone from Public Works please meet with me and the man from District 8. And that's something that residents in those districts have been complaining about for years, is a lack of attentiveness. And the other aspect that builds to that is for activists who want to get politicians to listen to them. If you're only a third of your district a third of your neighborhood is in a district, it's really hard, because if every single person in your third of the neighborhood comes out and votes against the council member, that's not really an influential amount. Slicing this up makes it so it's really hard to build cohesive influence for these neighborhoods. That's very different. I mean, you can just look at the map. It's very different from what you get in Arlington, from what you get in Mandarin, from what you get in San Marco, the South Side, all these other parts of the city where residents do have cohesive voices and cohesive districts. So some background on how gerrymandering can work when it comes to race or party. This is a graphic that I think is really helpful to think about it. You can draw with this same, assuming you have 50 people, 60% are orange and 40% are purple. You could draw it so that all 5 districts are orange, or you could draw it so that even though orange makes up 60% of the people, only 2 out of the 5 are orange. Depending on how you draw the lines. And that's the same thing that we saw here, which is that the council districts are drawn in a way that really maximizes the Black population in just 4 districts and limits Black population in all of the other ones. In Jacksonville, we do have in our city charter requirements for how redistricting is supposed to play out. And that includes a requirement that the districts are logical and compact, as logical and compact as it is possible to achieve. And in our laws, we also have that they're supposed to draw the districts so that the people of the city and their varied economic, social, and ethnic interests and objectives are adequately represented in the council, and that they are required to receive public input into the process. Some of you may be aware of, and the League of Women Voters was very involved in this with the Fair Districts Amendments on the state level. And those don't apply at the local level, but those requirements are that you can't favor or disfavor a political party, you can't dilute racial or language minorities, and you can't diminish their ability to elect representatives of their choice. Also requires compact districts, equal population, and using political and geographic boundaries when necessary. What we're dealing with in Jacksonville right now is a lawsuit that was filed that challenged the city council maps on 14th Amendment grounds under the Equal Protection Clause. And basically, you're not allowed to use race as a predominant factor when you do redistricting unless it's to comply with the Voting Rights Act. You can't just willy-nilly say, we want to pack as many Black voters as we want in this district. You can only make that a major consideration if you're trying to comply with the Voting Rights Act. And here it would just be Section 2. In Section 2, there's a test that if people are more interested in, I can explain further, but there's a test for when it applies, and you're not supposed to go beyond what's necessary. In Jacksonville, they never claimed the Voting Rights Act applied, yet race did predominate in redistricting, and it predominated in this way where Black voters were packed far beyond what they needed to be, and it really has hurt Black voters for decades. And so that claim the court found was likely to succeed, and it's really extraordinary. We don't see a lot of preliminary injunction orders like this. This is a very rare thing to happen. This means that Jacksonville is in the upper echelon of oppressive governments in the United States that are oppressing the voices of Black voters. And that's what we're seeing play out. And since the court order, the court has given a very short timeline, 30 days for the city council to pass new maps. And the city council has frankly just at every stage of the legal process seemed to go out of its way in not giving the most genuine arguments to the court. So in this case, they told the court, there's no way we can possibly meet your deadline, the same day that they had a meeting where they said, we're definitely going to meet the deadline and we're going to meet it 4 days ahead of time. And similarly, the court has told them they should use the plaintiff's voting rights analysis if they can't do their own. And the city has said, we're not going to do a voting rights analysis because we don't have time and we don't plan to account for the Voting Rights Act at all. So yesterday they announced they will not try to draw districts that comply with the VRA. And instead they're going to just ignore the VRA. So again, kind of just the required factors, which this is true this time, just like it was last time, is that the districts are relatively equal in population, that they don't discriminate on the basis of race, that they're logical and compact, that they're drawn to represent diverse interests, and that public interest is considered. Now, they can include any number of optional factors. They can choose to do partisan gerrymandering, or they can choose to make fair proportional maps. They could say we want, to consider party. There's no problem with that, at least legally speaking. They could try to draw competitive districts or try to eliminate competitive districts. They could choose whether they want to split or not split neighborhoods. Right now, the city council has decided they would like to split up Riverside, Avondale, and Murray Hill into 3 different districts. That seems to be the favored map from them. And so it's kind of clear that splitting neighborhoods is not a big concern for the current committee. And they could also try to redraw the map so that no districts cross the St. Johns River. But that's not something that they seem interested in either. So a big part of the case to date has been the history of redistricting. And I spent more than a year in the archives at the library digging into just how these maps came about. Originally, under the consolidation, City Council was not allowed to redraw its districts. It was an independent panel that did it. That changed by 1981, which was the first time they redrew the districts. And race was a really major factor that time. They drew 3 districts intentionally to be at least 65% Black, and a 4th district that was about 55% Black. And that was based off a misreading of a court ruling at the time. And the Department of Justice called that misreading in Sarasota, where they made the same misreading. They tried to do 65%. The Department of Justice called it misinformation. People who are misreading a court ruling as requiring 65% Black districts. Again, the impact of that, in 1980s, we had a Senate district that was elected Dr. Girardeau. It was a Black performing district, and it was about 49% Black. So 65% was far beyond what likely would have been necessary. And then by 1991, they hired former Florida Speaker of the House, John Mills, to draw what they called the 63% plan. And in this plan, it was to draw 4 districts that were about 63% or higher Black. And again, the result of that, which you can see in the demographic chart there, is the other districts surrounding it were extremely white. And there was never any basis for how they came up with 63% as a figure. But the people who were on the 1981 and 1991 City Council continue to be on City Council for subsequent plans and believed that this was a legitimate basis. So in 2001, there was an effort to unite Murray Hill with Riverside and Avondale, and it was rejected because it was said it would turn that district into about a 56, 57% Black district, and that would somehow violate federal law. That was not true. It was just based on misinformation and the incompetence of our city government. That incompetence and misinformation continued in 2011 when they passed the plan that we currently have right now. And they were very explicit. City council members said, I will not vote for this unless there are 4 districts that are at least 60% Black. They rejected any alternative. And in fact, District 1 that we have today, which is that Arlington district, Black Democratic council members were fiercely opposed to creating that district because they wanted the parts of West Arlington that had higher Black percentages to be combined with a district across the river. They ended up losing that argument, which created a much more competitive district in addition to the 4 that exist. Today, where we are is the city council has settled on 2 maps that it's narrowed in on that it wants to refine, and that they hired an expert who's a former staffer for a GOP congressman who's frequently hired by city and county governments for this sort of thing. And he drew these maps, which they said they liked, and that's lime and maroon are the way that they're referred. And you can see, especially in maroon, with how it handles that Riverside, Avondale, Murray Hill area, where you have a district that swoops in to one portion of kind of 5 points, another district that gets part of Riverside, and another district that cuts Avondale in half. And that's been a key contention because Councilwoman Randy DeFore had explicitly said she wanted to keep those districts together before the districts were drawn, but it doesn't seem that that is a priority for the other council members. Also beyond that is the maroon map, which is the one they seem to favor the most, is by most partisan metrics the most pro-Republican gerrymander of them. It makes this District 14 around Ortega much more Republican than it is today. It also reduces, which is probably appropriate, the amount in the District 9, but they claimed that they were following communities of interest. I don't know that there's any reason to believe that District 9 needs to come up this high if they're just following communities of interest or neighborhood lines. The two other maps, just to show alternatives of what it would look like, the plaintiff submitted a map to the city council for their consideration. It didn't get much discussion other than it was criticized as a Democratic gerrymander. Most partisan metrics would rate it as being a more neutral map, though still favoring Republicans just because of the segregation in our city. But this map was what they looked at and they said was inappropriate. And then this was a map, just one of 11 maps that I published on our website at jackstrib.org showing what redistricting plans could look like, which again shows what it would look like to draw more compact maps that follow more closely neighborhood lines. The next steps, the city council is meeting again today at 12 p.m. and then again tomorrow at 5 p.m. Today and tomorrow at 12 p.m. and then again tomorrow at 5 p.m. And then they will have a final vote on Friday at 9 a.m. The federal court will allow the plaintiffs to challenge the maps that the city council passes, and then the court will select a final map before December 16th, which is when the supervisor of elections has said it needs new maps in play. These city council maps will go into effect in March and May of next year in those elections. And that'll be the first time when people get to vote on them. Every city council seat will be up, as well as all the city offices. And then it will also affect school board districts as well, because the school board districts are made up of 2 city council districts. So that will come up again in 2024 when we'll have school board elections. If you're interested in learning how to draw your own map, I know the deadline for city council is running tight, but I always highly recommend for people, it's really a great way to learn your city is to try to draw one of these maps. You can do so at davesredistricting.org. If you go to my website, jackstrib.org, we've got a tutorial for how to draw these maps. I always find it's really helpful to get to know how this works and what it looks like to make some of the trade-offs. You can then take any map, including your own or the city's maps, and you can use tools like Dave's Redistricting app or Plan Score to assess whether the map is a gerrymander and see some of the metrics on it. I use some of my own code when I'm assessing the maps that allows me to break down recent elections. But those are simple tools that you can use to see just how gerrymandered on race or party these maps are. And if you want to learn anything more, again, my website, we've been covering this now for more than a year, and we've been writing about the problems that the city council is going to face with their racial gerrymandering. And for more than a year, the city has been ignoring that reporting and insisting that what they are doing is right. And what we're seeing now is the impact, which is federal court is intervening. And for the first time in Jacksonville's history, a federal court is going to determine what a legally compliant map should look like. And so I'm going to stop sharing, and then we can kind of have more of an informal discussion and talk through some questions that people have. And I feel like I've been talking at you and talking really fast going through this. So hopefully we can get to any questions people have.
Actually, Andrew, I will say, I think you've done a really great job at keeping this pretty low tech in a way. So it kind of invites the public to really understand what's going on and get involved. So a couple of questions for you regarding District 12. It says District 12 was split in 2 halves on each side of the Buckman Bridge. Is that being contested in court?
So I think that might be the State House District. There's a State House District that crosses the Buckman Bridge, and that's not being contested in court. The state legislature, that was never discussed. House Democrats in Tallahassee made a decision this time to basically not engage in the redistricting process. They kept claiming courts were going to come in and they would strike down the maps later. But not only did courts not strike them down, but there's actually an automatic review process where the Florida Supreme Court reviews the maps afterward. And this is the first time in Florida history that nobody filed a brief arguing that the maps violated the law. So when we talk about own goals and when we talk about incompetence, I definitely think House Democrats earned their own Incompetence of the Year award because they were very reliant on the courts were going to strike these down, but literally not a single person even challenged them in court. And by not engaging in the process in Tallahassee, they never offered any suggestions on things like should House District 12 in Jacksonville cross the St. Johns River and include very disparate neighborhoods. The result of that crossing of the St. Johns River does create a more Republican district for Wyman-Duggan than would have otherwise passed. But again, there was no complaints about it at the time. and there was not a lot of engagement in Tallahassee at the time.
Okay, thank you. Next question has to do with our at-large districts here in Jacksonville. Are at-large districts required under state law? And in your opinion, do they actually help or hurt us?
So the at-large districts are not required under state law. They are in our charter, so it would require a charter revision to change them. There's actually a very interesting history with the at-large seats here. And this plays into how Black voters historically for a long time have been really had their voting power attacked in Jacksonville. So we had Black representatives on city council until about 1910, and then we didn't have any more. And then in the 1940s, we still had districts at the time, Jacksonville did, and a Black man almost won a district in the 1940s. In response to that, the city decided to go to all at-large elections to make sure that white voters would hold power over Black voters. And then by the 1960s, Black voters almost were a majority so that they would have won all of the at-large seats. And so in response to that, the city drew single member districts again, which was how Sally B. Mathis and Mary Singleton got elected at first. The charter promise and the consolidation task force promised that there would be no at-large seats on Jacksonville City Council because there were a lot of Black voters who were worried that adding in the white suburbs into Jacksonville would limit their ability to get elected if there were at-large seats. So they were promised it was going to be 22 city council districts. The problem was it then went to the legislature, and the legislature actually wrote the first charter, and the legislature changed that 22 to 14 and added in 5 at-large seats. And all across the country, at-large seats have repeatedly been struck down in populations with large Black populations in the South because they tend to be diluting the vote of Black voters. They're not being challenged right now. Right now, the lawsuit has only been under the 14th Amendment saying that they unnecessarily packed voters, but it's always possible that it could be added on later. Jacksonville's at an interesting point in its history where it's becoming more of a competitive county. So there is more ability at the at-large level. Right now, all 5 at-large council members are Republicans. And they are the preferred candidates of white voters, but not Black voters. But it's possible that could change in the future, but so far that's not been challenged.
All right, thank you so much. This is a question about the census. In your opinion, did the census during the pandemic create an underreporting, which then impacted equality in population for districts and the number of districts? Yeah,
definitely. There was significant underreporting in the census, especially among immigrant communities. There was high underreporting, which does impact both the equality and the population for districts, but also in Florida, we were expected to get 2 new congressional districts. We instead only got 1. And that's believed to be because of underreporting with the census. While other states like Minnesota, for example, had very low underreporting, and it was expected to lose a congressional district, but ended up not needing to because they were able to count their population more effectively.
Okay. And to your knowledge, can the judge actually impose the plaintiff's map?
Yeah. So the judge is going to be assessing. There's a deference given to the city council with what map that they choose. But the city council, again, I mean, I do not often wade into opinion, but it is kind of undisputed fact at this point that the city council has decided to snub its nose and poke a finger in the eye of the judge. And in my experience, that's not a great idea. And the judge has repeatedly used sharp language with the city council. And so I could see a situation where the judge ends up imposing the plaintiff's map and says to the city council that they did not follow her order appropriately. One of the things that she has really prioritized is compactness. And as you saw with the 2 maps they're narrowed in on, those are much less compact than the plaintiff's map. And so it's possible that that's one of the factors that really is persuasive to her.
Okay, thank you. So this is from a member who received their new voter information card. It changed their congressional district from District 4 to 5 and their House district from 16 to 12. She's just asking if you can explain or show on a map those changes, which is that's at the state level.
Yeah. So one of the things that happened was the congressional districts changed drastically, and also they changed the numbering. So if you were in CD4 before, you're probably in CD5 now, and if you're in CD5 before, you're probably in CD4 now. Can't explain why that was part of the factor for them, why they wanted to do that, but they did. And I do actually have a really great link, an interactive that I didn't create, but I'm a very big fan of. So let me pull that up, and I'll put that in the chat. If you want to kind of move to the next question while I'm doing that, and I'll.
Yeah, so the next one is a state one also, just asking for an update on the congressional district lawsuit against the Secretary of State and the Senate and the House.
Yeah, so there are two lawsuits going on right now. One is in Tallahassee in the state court, and that's based on the Fair Districts amendments that we all passed overwhelmingly a decade ago. And that one, initially a DeSantis appointed judge struck down, and the appellate courts ended up overturning him largely on the grounds that he used an inappropriate injunction. It was not that his merits were wrong. It was that he shouldn't have imposed a new map. He should have just struck down the map and allowed the legislature to pass a new one. But now that is still proceeding, likely will not. We'll see if it affects 2024 or not, but since it's going to a full trial and then it'll be appealed, it may not take effect until 2026, even if it does strike down the map. There's a separate trial in federal court that has some federal claims on it as well. And that one will take potentially even longer to actually go to trial. The latest information on it has been that there's been a lot of fights over discovery, over getting information from legislators and the governor about how the map came to be. And in fact, the Jacksonville City Council hired the same lawyer, Jason Torchinsky, who was involved in helping the governor draw the new congressional map. So to help the city council with its appeal of the NAACP's lawsuit, they hired the same guy. So there's actually a bit of a connection there as well.
Yeah, so the previous 4 sessions, I think it was 4 sessions that were held, the listening sessions where they moved about the city, listening to input on the redistricting process and the maps. I think speakers got 2 to 3 minutes to speak. And if I'm not mistaken, the current meetings allow up to 60 seconds. Is that about right? Yeah,
so Council President Terrence Freeman has praised himself extensively and said that he is doing a fantastic job of being transparent and allowing the public to participate in the process. So much so that at the last meeting, they voted on and narrowed in on 2 maps before they heard from any public commenters. And then when they had public comment, they said because he has chosen to only schedule about 5.5 hours over the course of 1 month for the redistricting process, they just don't have enough time to allow public commenters to speak longer than 1 minute. And so they are really limiting the public comment. He does say Thursday nights at 5 p.m., which is, about 16 hours before they have a final vote, that he will have an opportunity for the public to engage with the city council's process. I am highly skeptical that 16 hours before, which includes hopefully 8 hours of sleep for some people, that they're actually going to take those considerations and make changes. But I think one thing that has been important throughout this process, one of the reasons the court has been smacked down so hard by a federal judge, and again, the language has been remarkable. I've not seen federal judges be so blunt in their assessment of our city government. But one of the big factors has been how they have regarded the public. The judge said that it was remarkable that the city council heard from hundreds of people, all of whom were unanimous in their criticisms of the maps, and didn't make a single change in response to those maps. And if that continues this time, I think that Judge Howard will again not be pleased with the city. So while public comment does not seem to be something that is affecting city council, it is affecting the judge.
Yeah, so I just want to say, you know, what we've seen from you, and I just want to reiterate this about the League of Women Voters. So we are a nonpartisan political organization. So we're, you know, really not about the political party or candidates in this case, but we do want to make sure that every voter's voice is heard and their vote has value, and that we don't have people through the gerrymandering process to really, you know, between packing and diluting votes. We just want to make sure that people have an opportunity to elect candidates that represent them, and that you don't have candidates that really get to pick and choose who gets to cast a vote for them. We struggle right now with candidates even coming out to meet with voters, to hear from the people that they claim that they want to represent at different levels of government. So this is just really an ongoing struggle. And we do have a question here about the court. Let me find this, I apologize. It says, any insider guesses about what the 11th Circuit might do with the city of Jacksonville map disaster? Their words, not mine.
Yeah, I don't, if the city is hoping that the 11th Circuit is going to rule in their favor, I mean, I can't predict what the 11th Circuit will do. The 11th Circuit is our federal circuit court of appeals, and it is a conservative circuit court of appeals. I will say our circuit, however, unlike some other circuits like the Fifth Circuit, has been more willing to abide by precedent, and also was recently smacked down by the U.S. Supreme Court as well. So the U.S. Supreme Court recently issued a decision in a redistricting case, a voting rights case out of Georgia, dealing with the Public Service Commission up there, which were all elected at large. And now they're going to be required to be elected by district. And the Supreme Court overturned the 11th Circuit. And I wouldn't be surprised if that chastising of the 11th Circuit makes them less willing to stop lower court orders, because that was what happened in that case. I'll also say what we have in this case is Judge Marcia Morales Howard, is a very well-respected federal judge. She was appointed by George W. Bush, though I will say at the federal level in Florida, we've been very fortunate due to a non-partisan judicial nominating commission process that who nominates judges has not mattered as much as in some other states. And our judges, I feel like, tend to be respected pretty well by the appellate courts. And Judge Howard has been really meticulous in her orders, writing very long and making sure that she includes a lot of rationale behind her decision. So I don't see the 11th Circuit. I don't think that it's an obvious thing that they're going to side with the city. I'm not going to predict that they'll definitely continue to strike down the map, but it also, in the grand scheme of things, there is it can be confusing for people to understand how this interplays with the congressional map. Because at the congressional map, Governor DeSantis argued that he needed to veto a map that had a Duval-only district, a very compact Duval-only district that had been drawn that would have allowed Black voters to elect their preferred candidates in a congressional seat, because he said it took race too much into account. And he says that even though that was a district that was supposed to be protected by the Fair Districts Amendments language, that he did not think that was a compelling government interest. So he's saying race should not be a major factor in redistricting. Meanwhile, on the other hand, you have the city council that's saying race should be a major factor even if you're not trying to comply with Voting Rights Act. And so that's, for the 11th Circuit to side with the city there, it would not be helping them if they also intend to side with the governor, basically. There's two opposite attacks on Black voting. One is packing Black voters into a few districts. The other is cracking or spreading them apart, which is what happened in the congressional map, where there's no one district that has a large Black population because they've been spread out across districts.
Andrew, the next question is, in your opinion, how impactful are the maps on incumbent members? I think there are 7 that are running for re-election.
Yeah, so extremely. City council members very much want to protect themselves. And that's been, they claimed it was not a major factor in the last maps, but now they're claiming it's a major factor this time. So they are very much careful to draw maps that are going to keep council members in separate districts. And that's really difficult to do because if you look at where they live, for example, Brenda Priestley Jackson and Jacoby Pittman live right across the street from each other. One lives right next to Rains and the other lives right next to Ribault. And so it's really hard to draw districts that don't put them in the same one. Or, Tyrona Clark Murray lives not too far from Randy White. But because of the gerrymandered nature of the districts, they do tend to live in clustered areas together. And that limits, if they continue to hold to that, that limits their ability to really clean up and cleanse what has been a broken process for decades.
Okay, so let's say that they decide that the maroon redistricting map is the way that they want to go. What's the next step after this?
So still this week you have a chance to weigh in, and again I think that's going to matter to the court if people do weigh in and what they say, and then after that, plaintiffs will have, I forget the number of days, but they'll have something like a week or a little over a week to challenge that map. The city has said they are not going to try to comply with the Voting Rights Act. So part of that responding to the map will likely include a Voting Rights Act analysis. It's possible that map still complies with the Voting Rights Act, even if they didn't do the analysis. But the city's not going to be ready to respond to that because the city is going to say, we don't intend to respond to that claim. And so that, again, disadvantages the city in front of the court. And the plaintiffs will submit their own maps and the city will be able to respond to those maps. The maps the plaintiffs submit could be very different from the one they sent to city council already. They could change them or it could be the same. That kind of remains to be seen. And then the judge may hold a hearing. I wouldn't be surprised if we get another hearing about the remedial maps, saying to decide which map Judge Howard will select. And Judge Howard likely will not just be saying which map is her favorite map. It's going to be which map is, complying with the law. But the city, if they are continuing to play games, I think they put themselves in a worse situation in front of the court. And I see a question as well in the chat about Jerry Holland with the neighborhood map. He was not requested to submit a neighborhood map. That was a question from me. So I did a project a while ago, an interactive map that showed how city council districts divided neighborhoods. The city responded by claiming they don't have a neighborhoods map. I got the neighborhoods map from the city, so it's a very odd claim. And they continue to claim they don't have a neighborhoods map, even though they do. It's on their website. And they claim that there are no official neighborhood designations, which again is not true. And in fact, Mayor Curry, not long after taking office, reestablished a neighborhoods department that is responsible for maintaining neighborhood designations. I called Jerry Holland because he's the property appraiser, and there are real estate designations that also include what neighborhood you're in. And I just want to know, hey, the city planning director says he's not capable of doing this. Is this a thing that you're capable of doing? And he said, yeah, I could do that by tomorrow if they asked me to. But again, the city council actually in 2021, he was the consultant for redistricting. And when Councilman Newby took over as council president, they ended him as the consultant. Fired seems like the wrong word for someone who's not paid because he wasn't paid extra for it, but he was basically fired and replaced by Bill Killingsworth, who says he's not capable of doing the work of having a neighborhoods map. So instead, they are not using neighborhood designations. They are using CPACs, the planning advisory councils, which I believe have been around for about 30 years. I think they were formed under Ed Austin. But even that doesn't actually add up because the districts are not following the CPAC lines either. But they claim they are. So, you know, this has been a really odd part of covering redistricting in Jacksonville is you're dealing with public officials who will tell you the sky is green and insist the sky is green. And it's been since day one. The first thing I reached out to them about, this was in spring of 2021. I reached out to the city because their memo, they put out a legal memo that misquoted case law. It changed the words in legal decisions and didn't explain why they were doing it. They would just bracket the words, which significantly changed the meaning. And it gave lots of advice that I talked to a bunch of law professors who said the memo was inaccurate and did not give good legal advice. The city never responded, and the city has never admitted that they did that. And continuing since then, and that was February of 2021. Since February of 2021, at every stage of the process, the city, when they do something wrong, just is unwilling to admit it. Another interesting example along those lines has just been Bill Killingsworth came up with his own racial definition that differs from what the Department of Justice or the Office of Management and Budget from the federal government use. And he has been unwilling to change. And I think it was just a mistake. He's not a redistricting expert. I think he didn't realize he was using the wrong definition. But there's a dangerous mixture of hubris and incompetence in which a lot of these people don't realize when they make a mistake. I don't think it's always intentional. I think it's sometimes mistakes, but their response to making a mistake is to buckle down and say, we're not going to change because we believe that, you know, if we admit we've done something wrong, then that's going to be dangerous for us.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting to a lot of us also that there are members of city council, especially those who served on the former redistricting committee, who they practice law. That's their day job. So some interesting observances there. I wanted to ask, you know, under Terrence Freeman, when he stood up the new redistricting committee, he did not appoint school board members to join. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know why. He said that he was talking with them and he did invite them to yesterday's meeting and he allowed them to weigh in. That was Kelly Coker went yesterday and weighed in. So it does seem he is giving them now the space, but it may have been more of an afterthought. So we'll see today if that continues. These do affect the school board districts, which is really important because on the west side and north side, what you have is a district that's currently represented by Charlotte Joyce that is much whiter than it would have been if not for the racial packing that's happened on the north side and west side. And so that is the school board district that's most affected. And so if they did redraw the districts and they're not considering unpacking right now, none of their proposals would do that. But if they did unpack the other city council districts, which form the school board districts that are represented by Warren Jones and Darrell Willey, that would also make Charlotte Joyce's district likely have a much higher Black population. And so that could be a downstream effect as well beyond the city council districts. One other thing for what comes next, I forgot to mention, Linnell. So this is all under a preliminary injunction. This is all under a motion, which means it's a really high bar to get. They met that high bar, but there's still a trial that is expected to take place next year. The court hasn't scheduled the trial, but the city and the plaintiffs have said December of next year is when would work for them for a trial. And if the city doesn't settle, if the city continues to fight this and it goes to trial, that'll open up a lot of information that we don't have right now in the form of depositions and witnesses at trial. So for example, we don't know what city council members tell Bill Killingsworth or this newly hired expert in one-on-one meetings. We don't know what has been said or not said. We only know what Killingsworth has told us. And one of the things he told us very early on in the process was that Jacoby Pittman told him she won't go below 68% Black. And so who knows what else other people have said in those one-on-one meetings. But if this does go to trial, that could also be very embarrassing for city council members.
Okay. Last question. We have some announcements to make after this as far as league goes, but last question for you, Andrew. So what does the public do? I mean, what is their role? What do they have the ability to do or impact anything at this point in the process?
Yeah, The city of Jacksonville, I'm a native of Jacksonville. I love the city of Jacksonville. Jacksonville has become sclerotic at times in allowing corruption and allowing government officials who don't seem to care what the public says. What's really amazing and remarkable about this this whole scenario in redistricting has been the fact that the judge is forcing the city to listen to the people, and the judge is paying attention to what people are saying that's getting submitted in the case. And so I think for people to continue to speak out, to continue to advocate for city council members to be more competent, to listen, and you know, the most amazing thing out of this is like city council is still fighting and appealing the decision, and there's been no apology. There's been no acknowledgement of wrong done, no acknowledgement of Black voters being harmed. And so for citizens to continue to speak up, I think against anything that city council members are doing that they feel is wrong, like there's an important space for citizens right now because the courts are watching. Like there's a really important space here to advocate for democracy and to advocate for, you know, fair districts.
Okay, so I just want to remind everybody, today is Wednesday. So today, Wednesday, tomorrow, Thursday at noon, there will be committee meetings downtown at 117 West Duval Street. And then there's something that you've referred to as a map chat at 5 p.m. I'm not sure how much chatting is going on in lieu of the 60-second, you know, public comment that's been made available. But Andrew, I do want to give you a chance to pitch something for the Tributary. As someone who receives the Tributary daily, I know that you have a news match with the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund. If you want to put that out there, we're happy to have you do it.
Thank you so much, Linnell. I was about to be remiss and kick myself for not mentioning it, but right now we're in our end of year giving campaign, and we've gotten matching dollars from national foundations as well as locally the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund. So if you appreciate the work we're doing, whether it's on the sheriff or on redistricting, now is the time where donations will make the most impact. This is a real matching donation program. So this is not, if ever you're skeptical, like, hey, aren't you going to get that money no matter what? Like we get a dollar for dollar match on the dollars we raise this month from a bunch of organizations. And so if you can become a donor at jackstrib.org, that really is what allows us to do this work and allows us to continue to report on what's happening in the city. So I would greatly appreciate it. And especially if you'd be willing to become a monthly donor, it makes a huge impact for us. Thank you, Linnell.
Okay. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. And again, the coverage that you and the Tributary have provided, whether it's been at the state level or at the local level, I think really has made a difference. I think redistricting is something that can seem a little overwhelming to the average citizen who doesn't participate in government on a regular basis. And I really do think that you kind of chop this thing up in very small digestible pieces. And then you invited the public into, you know, to participate. Making your live links available. I know that you were doing some live chatting in the redistricting meetings before, but I think government works best when more people participate and they have some level of understanding of what it is that they're being asked to participate in, but also how does it impact you on a daily basis in your neighborhood or in your school district. So I just really thank you so much for joining us today. I know that you're off to City Council to listen on what's going on. So we look forward to reading the Tributary tomorrow morning and get your observations on that. So we're going to send Andrew off. We do have a couple of announcements to make as far as league business itself goes. Just want to make sure that everyone knows that we do have a member appreciation dinner coming up on the 13th of November. I know that seems very far away for all of us working different aspects of elections. Some of you are poll workers, poll watchers, election protection, or you're working on campaigns, which we appreciate your involvement in that. But on November 13th out at UNF, we are going to celebrate a little bit. We're going to celebrate the work of our members and things that you have done over the last year or so to keep the league relevant and engaged and really allow us to support our community. So we're going to be issuing some well-deserved letters of appreciation and some certificates to our members We're also going to be recognizing 2 members who have been members of the league for 50 years. I just think that is phenomenal that they've stayed with the league this long and supported its work. So we've sent an email out to our members. It's also on our social media, and there's a scan code on your screen right now if you'd like to buy tickets and join us out there. So we just look forward to being in the same room together and really breaking bread with one another. Also, tomorrow night, wow, Thursday got here quick. Tomorrow evening, we are partnering with some major hitters that have been reaching out to people who are eligible to become naturalized citizens. And not only that, after they acquired their citizenship, they registered them to vote so that they can participate in this election. So we're going to be participating in Party to the Polls tomorrow evening at the Istanbul Center over on Southside Boulevard. If you're able to come out and join us, please do. We're going to be engaging new voters, and we're going to be encouraging them to turn out and cast their vote so they too can be part of the American dream and be civically engaged. And then just a reminder that we were just talking about the next 2 meetings that the public can engage in at noon today and tomorrow, and then that public chat. And as you see, Deb has provided us with the email address. And why is it important for you to send an email? Because this is part of public records. So when they talk about this being reviewed in the courts at a later date, all of this becomes part of public records. So you want to make sure that if you cannot attend in person, you want to make sure that your voice is heard as a constituent here in Jacksonville or in Duval County. So we hope that you will participate either in person or you will submit your thoughts so that our city council can become aware of them. And if you have not already visited our nonpartisan online voter guide, vote411.org, we would highly encourage you to do so. We had over 1 million hits on our online voter guide last election cycle. It really does allow you to see where candidates stand on certain issues. There's also information there about the 3 amendments that you will find on your ballot. So we really just want to make sure that you're informed when you do go to cast your vote between now and November 8th. And lastly, these are the places that you can find the League of Women Voters, our website, our Facebook page, Instagram, LinkedIn. You know, give us some feedback. How are we doing? What are some things that you would like to hear about from the League of Women Voters? Also, our dinner on the 13th is open to the public. So if you would like to come and meet some of our members, please feel free to purchase a ticket and see us out at UNF. So just want to give you back the rest of your afternoon. It is gorgeous outside. So please, if you haven't already cast your vote in the general election, we would appreciate if you would do so. You can vote at an early voting site between now and Sunday. You can vote in person.